Are also available in Spanish for any radio station to take, as close to 200 are. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Hissène Habré, the former president of Chad, is one of the most brutal dictators the U.S. has ever supported. Habré came to power with the help of former U.S. President Ronald Reagan in 1982. He's accused of systematic torture and the deaths of 40,000 of his political opponents. Reagan provided Habré with millions of dollars in annual military aid and trained his secret police, known as the DDS. When Habré fell from power in 1990, one of his victims, Souleymane Guengueng, vowed to bring the former president to justice. While Habré lived in comfortable exile in Senegal, Guengueng organized Habré's victims to seek his trial.
The Chadian activists were joined by a dictator hunter from New York in their quest for justice. Reed Brody of Human Rights Watch took interest in the Habre case after former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet was arrested in 1998. Since then, he's worked tirelessly to build a case against Habre. Habre was placed under house arrest in 2000. In July 2006, the African Union called on Senegal to prosecute Hissène Habré in the name of Africa. Unfortunately, 2 years later, Habre's trial is yet to begin. The Dictator Hunter is a new documentary that tells the story. It's directed by a Dutch filmmaker named Clarty Quirins. The film opens at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival in New York this weekend. We will show excerpts of the film, but first we're joined in the studio by two guests. By the Chadian activist who has spearheaded this case, who is a victim himself, Souleymane Guengueng, and by, well, the Dictator Hunter, Human Rights Watch counsel Reed Brody. Welcome both to Democracy Now!
Thank you. Thank you, Juan.
First, tell the story, Reed. Tell the story of how Hissène Habré came to power, was forced out, and where he stands today.
Well, Hissène Habré was a local warlord in Chad, which is a Central African country just south of Libya. And at the time, when Ronald Reagan came into office, he was looking for ways to counter Muammar Gaddafi's expansionist designs on Chad. And the very first covert operation of the Reagan era, before the Contras, before Jonas Savimbi, was putting Hissène Habré into power. Even though he had a reputation for brutality, he had already kidnapped a French anthropologist in the desert, killed the French hostage negotiator. Alexander Haig reportedly wanted to bloody Gaddafi's nose, and they supported Hissène Habré and taking power in Chad, and helped Hissène Habré, together with the French, helped Hissène Habré defeat the Libyans. But at the same time, Hissène Habré turned Chad into a police state. And created his private Gestapo, this DDS, that created dungeons all around Chad that engaged in waves of ethnic cleansing against different Chadian groups. We happened to discover, totally by chance, to stumble on the files of Hissène Habré's political police. Thousands and thousands of documents, death certificates, spying reports that give the names of 1,208 people who died in detention, that tell the story of people like Souleymane and others. Finally, in 1990, Hissène Habré was overthrown by the current president, Idriss Déby, and with the United States' help, he went to Senegal, which is where he lived for peacefully actually, before leaving Chad, he emptied out the country's treasury and stole millions and millions of dollars and brought that money with him to Senegal, where he created relationships and built a web of protection. And that's probably the way it would have remained had it not been for the Pinochet case. And as you know, we worked on the Pinochet case, and the Pinochet case was an inspiration to victims around the world who said, well, wait a second, we have a legal tool that we can use to bring to justice people who seemed out of the reach of justice. And the Chadian, we were introduced by Chadian activists to the Chadian victims, and we started working with them. And 8 years ago, in 2000, on the heels of the Pinochet case, Souleymane and others filed a case in Senegal Senegal, charging Hissène Habré with crimes against humanity and torture, and he was actually arrested and indicted for those crimes 8 years ago. Senegalese courts then, after political interference, decided not to pursue the case. The victims then filed the case in Belgium, which had a long-arm universal jurisdiction statute, and after a 4-year investigation, the Belgian courts indicted Hissène Habré for crimes against humanity and sought his extradition. And that was a complicated story. Then the Senegalese refused the extradition of Hissène Habré, and they went to the African Union and said, what should be done with Hissène Habré? And the African Union, which was one of the major coups in this case, a union with people like Mugabe and Gaddafi and Sassou and Bongo, said that Senegal had to try Hissène Habré. And 2 years ago, Senegal agreed to the African Union request to put Hissène Habré on trial. But as you said, 2 years later, they still haven't started that trial, and that's where we stand today.
And the reasons that Senegal gives for the delays, I understand they did make certain changes in their own laws to be able to pave the way for this, but they still haven't actually moved forward.
That's right. Actually, Senegal now has the best laws on prosecuting war crimes and crimes against humanity. They've changed their laws. They've changed their constitution. They've named a coordinator to oversee the trial. They're just going about it very slowly. And the victims don't have time. I mean, this is 18 years since Hissène Habré was ousted. Many of the people who started this with Souleymane, who were with me 8 years ago when we filed the case, are dead now.
I want to turn to Souleymane, but first I want to go to the film and play an excerpt of the Dictator Hunter. Here, Reed Brody, you're given a tour of one of Hissène Habré's notorious prisons.
Once this used to be a swimming pool, reserved for the families of the French military. Later on, Hissène Habré turned the pool into a jail, a unique prison. I was tortured. They tied my arms behind my back to stop the blood circulating and to paralyze one's arms and legs, to make people lose their limbs. In this cell, for example, there were 30 people. All cells were full. There was no oxygen. People died of lack of oxygen. It is a very cruel way to torture someone. Every morning we would knock on the walls like this. The people in the cell next to ours would do the same, to show us they were still alive. If someone died, we would ask them to take away the corpse. They would say, how many are there? If we said 2 or 3, they told us to wait till there were 5. Those who suffered most, we would lay on the corpses, as they were a little cooler. We slept on them till they were taken away.
An excerpt of The Dictator Hunter. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're joined by Reed Brody of Human Rights Watch and Souleymane Guengueng, who was one of Hissene's victims, the former Chadian president. Reed, if you could translate for Souleymane. Souleymane, what happened to you?
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé avec toi?
Moi, jusqu'à l'heure où je parle, on ne m'a jamais dit le pourquoi on m'avait arrêté.
Even now, as I speak to you, I was never explained why I was arrested.
On est venu me m'arrêter de mon bureau, on m'a amené en prison, et tout ce qu'on m'a fait, je n'ai jamais vu un être humain peut faire ça à son prochain.
I was taken away from my office, and I can't imagine human beings doing what was done to me.
C'est à partir de cette situation que je me suis dit, mais est-ce que ce genre de choses devait passer sous silence? Il faut absolument que Dieu me prête la vie et un jour, il faut que cette vérité sorte. Le pourquoi on a tant fait du mal.
I said to myself, these things should never happen, and if God allows me to survive for this, I'm going to fight to find out why this happened, and so it never happens again.
C'est en sorte un serment que j'ai prêté devant Dieu, et Dieu m'a préservé la vie. C'est pourquoi j'ai organisé tous les amis pour que nous luttions jusqu'à vraiment connaître la vérité. Et Dieu merci, Dieu a prêté Human Rights Watch, au nom de Human Rights Watch, la personne comme Reed, vraiment que dès le début, depuis 1979, qu'on s'est rencontrés. Et alors,
it was kind of an oath that I took before God, and God helped me get out of prison, and He gave me groups like Human Rights Watch and people like Reed.
Et sinon, c'est comme un peu partout dans l'Afrique, la chose allait se passer aussi sous silence si Human Rights Watch ne venait pas nous découvrir.
And as often happens in Africa, this would have happened without anybody saying anything had Human Rights Watch not gotten involved in the case.
Alors,
what did they do exactly to you?